Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the KM4Dev Knowledge Cafe. And today we are going to have a session on how to create value creation in communities of practice. Joining with us here, we have our colleagues, Maureen Kenga, Rocio Sanz, and also Olga, who is our speaker. For those who are joining here for the first time, we also have the recordings of the previous Knowledge Cafe, which Rocio is going to share the link. And for today's Knowledge Cafe, the vision is going to be, we have first Olga, who is a social learning consultant from Denmark. She will open up the session, sharing her experience from the Denmark communities of practice, showcasing the value creation, and also learning to make difference and bringing up with some specific examples from Denmark. Then we are going to breakout rooms to reflect on our experiences on bringing value to communities of practice. And finally, we will close with a plenary discussion that we hope it will be enriched by all our experience. So I would like to welcome Olga to open up the session. Over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join today. This is a real pleasure because when I think of people working with communities of practice, somehow KM4Dev always comes to my mind, and I expect that a lot of people have experience working with communities of practice in different settings in different countries. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be able to speak to all of you today and to engage with some of your experience. What we are going to do today, as Gladys just presented, is going to be a short introduction from my side, where I hope I'm going just to help you to start thinking about value creation in KM4Dev as well, as a community that you join and you participate in, and then to think about value creation in your own experience with other communities that you work with. My name is Olga, and I'm speaking out of Denmark in Copenhagen today. And I have a couple of slides that I would like to show, and then I will speak about communities of practice, the way that I worked with them so far, and somehow I have a sense that the experience in this room is probably 1,000 times bigger than my own, but let me present what I've been doing with communities of practice and how come I'm the one speaking about value creation today. It's been quite a big topic, I think, for my work so far. Could somebody please confirm that the slides are going through fine enough? Good. Thank you for the invitation again. And I'm speaking out of Denmark. And I think it's probably no surprise that I'm doing my work as a management consultant, working specifically with communities of practice and social learning, because I live in Denmark. Denmark has quite a number of different examples of communities of practice work, and also has been one of the early adopters of this work. Ever since the first books, the first articles came out, Denmark has been one of the countries in the world where I've seen a very early adoption of this work, both in the academic settings, but also in the professional settings, in the organizations where we work with people, right? Yeah, so what I would like to start with is a little bit of a presentation of myself. So you know me, I don't think many people have seen me before. At least I don't know that many familiar faces I haven't seen in the room so far. So I'm new to KM4Dev, and I will be sharing experience with public and private organizations mainly, so internal communities of practice, probably a different setting than what KM4Dev is doing in a very international scope. I'll do my best to share what I've learned and what I've done, and do ask questions as we go, because it would be lovely to have a conversation instead of just me speaking here. I am working as a management consultant these days, and it's only been 4 years that I've been doing this work on my own. Before that, I've been working in an international organization. I worked with learning basically and with training, and that was back in time in 2014 when I started thinking about communities of practice. And my entry into this work was very practical. We worked with a training program for a sales force in the renewable energy sector in the wind industry. And the majority of our participants were coming back to us saying, all the programs when we come to Denmark learn about wind, it's a new industry, for many countries, it was like people being hired, 1 or 2 persons in a team trying to establish wind industry in another country. So they would come and tell us, everything is great, but could we talk much more with other participants? Could we see the other people in that other country working as commercial sales managers? And we were really puzzled at that time. So for me, my entry point into community of practice work was that practical question of what do we do with this kind of feedback if people are asking for more time with each other? I worked in a training team, and for us at that time, community of practice was not a kind of familiar concept. So for some 8 years now, since 2014 at least, I've been working with communities of practice. And the transition from being internal as a consultant to being external has been quite easy, but I'm doing it on my own right now. If you look at the number 9+, I was very optimistic, I think, at the time when I joined the community of practice work. I jumped directly into the certificate program with Etienne and Beverly Venga-Trainer, and I thought as a newcomer, it would be great to have experts helping me to figure out how we are going to support our sales organization. So I jumped directly into being taking a certificate program on communities of practice on social learning leadership. And then from there, I found myself at one point being called a fellow. And I think I'm probably, if you, if I have to be very honest, I think I'm probably the youngest and least experienced in this group, but somehow I ended up being there. I sometimes blend and mix some languages together because I live in Denmark. I also work in Danish. So if you hear me switching between languages, please bear with me. On the daily basis, my kids tell me whatever language I speak, I think I speak it somehow with some mistakes. So I'm fine. But I've been in Denmark for 16 years, which means that I do my work in English and in Danish. And what I've been trying to do since that certificate program that I joined was to understand this idea with value creation. And my feedback from the panel review that I did at that time was that I should be probably paying a little more attention to the value and how it manifests itself. So I spent a lot of time trying to kind of evaluate, recognize value in communities of practice and understand it, both at the time when I was hired in the company in this international organization, and now on my own working with different kind of organizations in Denmark. And to be honest, I always feel that if you have that many hours trying to recognize value in communities of practice, it could have been nice if it was like when therapists learn to do it, when it's like supervised hours, when you have somebody helping you to figure out what you're doing, right? But we are not there with communities of practice work, or I wish somebody picked up that idea and did something about having this kind of peer supervision on how we understand communities of practice, especially when it comes to the value of it. That's shortly about me. And what we're going to do from now on is looking into some of the communities of practice in Denmark, what's happening in this wonderful country. I think it's wonderful. I love it. I've been here for 16 years. But we are also going to slowly transition before we ask you to go into the breakout rooms, as Gladys mentioned before. We are going to slowly transition into KM4Dev, and there we prepared a few examples of KM4Dev and value creation in this group, in this wonderful setting. So I'll start with Denmark first, because somehow one way or another, I always feel I represent Denmark when I speak about communities of practice. I represent what's possible in Denmark, what kind of culture that helps communities of practice thrive. So communities of practice in Denmark is a topic that is quite dear to my heart. I like it. I think Denmark has done an amazing progress with communities of practice. So what I'm going to show you now is this very busy graph. But you will see that when people in Denmark hire for different kind of jobs and positions, communities of practice is one of the things that you use to attract talent, to attract people, to a good culture, to a good organizational setup. So you will see that communities of practice are used in just job descriptions quite often. And I pull out this overview from 2010, from 2000 to today, 2023, to show you that communities of practice are used in almost any setting, I think, in Denmark, directly and indirectly. So we talk very much about internal communities, but you will see that both the Danish translation of the word is used and the community of practice as like the English phrase, both are used, but in somewhat different settings. That's what I like about this overview. You will see that communities of practice, if you use the English terminology, it would be used more in IT. Even if the company is working in Danish, right, and speaks Danish to each other on the daily basis, you would see communities of practice being used in English and in management quite often. But if you take the Danish translation, and to be honest, there is so much work on communities of practice in Denmark that is in Danish, and I wish it was at one point translated back into English so everybody could benefit from it as well. But if you take the Danish word, then it's more in the schooling settings, teaching, in the social and healthcare settings where people do speak Danish more or less on the daily basis, even if everybody is very good at speaking English. So this is what I do, sometimes switch between the two languages. And quite often we also joke a little bit in Denmark that the two things, the two concepts in the English language and the Danish language, they sometimes have a different meaning and have a different feel to it. But that's more of our internal discussions, I think, with people who are working on communities of practice in Denmark. What you probably want to notice here is that communities of practice is a thing that management needs and would like to understand in Denmark, in both Danish and the English language. And that's where I kind of come into the picture, because when I stopped working for the large international company, I started doing this work on my own. And I work mainly as a management consultant, actually. So I work with private and public organizations. And that's where, if you look at the overviews again, you will see them being probably spread across all the sectors. Healthcare, I've had not a crazy amount of projects, but all the projects that I've had, they've been both in engineering and in IT, in healthcare, in the public sector, and so on. I will leave you with this overview of Denmark and the way Denmark quite likes to use communities of practice as a way to attract people to jobs, to promote the good culture in organizations. And we'll move on to the next part on the kind of work that I do and where value creation is important. Yeah, a bit of text here and no visual representation, but I thought it would be interesting to highlight some facts. The way I get to engage with organizations in Denmark is when managers would like to understand the communities internally and would like to understand and recognize the value that communities are creating. So I've done evaluation of events that are done differently, that are planned in ways that engage people with each other or give space for this flexible setting where people can be together. Evaluation of communities of practice directly, and some kind of different learning interventions, change projects or change initiatives that would like to bring people closer together, especially when it comes to different groups on the boundaries between, for example, testing, people who are doing testing of software and people who are doing development of software. This is where I come in, and those of you who are from Denmark or speak Danish will probably recognize it. And if you don't recognize, then give me, the feedback. What I see in Denmark is the culture of a lot of negotiation, but also consensus seeking. And quite often when I come into the picture, it's because management would like to understand what kind of value communities of practice are creating or social learning is creating for organizations, and then how it manifests itself in different ways, especially if you have 3 different units, for example, working on the same thing in an organization, right? And with that, the ability to work together in the leadership group is also quite often a question, because you bring people from different parts of the organization, different units together in an overview of the value that's being created in that local context. And then managers have an ability to share the responsibility for the decisions going forward. To give you very practical examples of what I get to do, I've used the value creation framework from Beverly and Vengatraina quite extensively. I've been doing interviews and some sort of conversations, collecting data on the cases that I work with. And quite often the cases are different in and of themselves. So I thought of sharing some cases from Denmark where since the 80s, right, and the 90s, when the community of practice work just started to appear in the materials and the work that is published, then in Denmark, people kind of picked it up and understood quite well. So you can see some groups working in organizations that are very much trying to cross the boundary between, for example, healthcare and IT. So you will see a group of clinical IT consultants who are people with medical backgrounds working on IT and trying to really bridge between the technologies that are used in hospitals and the doctors and the nurses who are working there, so the medical practices there. So I do interviews, I collect stories. I collect stories of value creation based on the framework. Many of you might be familiar with it. If you are not, there are, of course, some of the books that could be read and researched. It's requested quite often as a way to understand what a manager, internal or typically a sponsor of a community of practice, ends up being one of the managers in the organization. And especially if you're a manager who would like to work together with people in a very Danish way of doing it, I would say, then I come into the picture to collect the data on what kind of value is being created and how it manifests itself in different settings. And that overview is given some of the leaders in the organization a good way and a foundation to work further on what could be prioritized and how learning could be supported going forward. Not sure if I mentioned it in the beginning, but I worked as a learning and training consultant. So that's the kind of work that I do. So I always end up working with competence development, learning, and communities of practice as well at the same time. What I would like to share going forward are some of the examples of how to start thinking of value creation in KM4Dev, and this was really an experiment for us. So if I go from here, you are very welcome to ask me some questions. But if I go from here to value creation in KM4Dev, what we tried to do here is to make an experiment with the help of Gladys and Maureen, who were very eager to jump on the opportunity and think out loud, really, together with me, of what is value creation in KM4Dev and how it manifests itself in their personal experience of being in the group and their personal experience of participating. We've done basically something that I could probably do with some of my clients as well. We try to think out loud of what is value for their context and what is value for their personal experience of participation. And that was based on some of the questions that you will see on the screen. If you're familiar with the value creation framework from Bethany and Vengatraina, then you would know some of the questions. But you can imagine me taking some of these questions to some of the work that I do as well, asking people, first of all, to understand the context of the work that they do, to understand how they see what is being created of value for themselves and for the work that they do back in their organizations, departments. And the context is always very much based on understanding the place of this community in your work. Is it something you have full dedication to because you are working in this community at the same time as you have a full-time job doing this somewhere, or you're joining into it, how you ended up being here, how you ended up doing what you do. A lot of you probably have a good story to tell how you joined KM4Dev. And when we open the breakout rooms, I think we're going to ask you to think about that as well. So areas of value creation in your own experience and some of the activities or relations that you found very useful for your own sake somehow in this group, in this community. And from there, what I like to do is to try to zoom into what kind of ideas were very useful and where do they come from. And those of you who speak Danish would probably recognize the word guldkorn. And guldkorn in Danish would mean, oh, Jakob is smiling, I guess you are. you understand what I say. So the insights that are coming from your colleagues, the good stuff that they share, right? The good ideas that they've kind of tried out and know what works, what doesn't. So all of that is very important to share and to present going forward. So we've tried to do the same with Gladys, and they were very brave, both Gladys and Maureen, just having a half an hour conversation with me, thinking out loud, what is the value of KM4Dev? That more or less is the starting point for a lot of the questions that forward come from there, because if you have that good idea from somebody shared that with you, you probably can't wait to kind of put it in practice or try, because when you think it's a good idea in the first place, that means probably that you really you are eager to try it out and to see how it works for you, and what kind of effects that creates. There is nothing new probably from this overview of the questions that I like to ask. I like to have a very personal conversation with people about their experience. So those of you who are familiar with the framework will probably not see anything new here other than my little addition of the word kulkuan that I think everybody in the whole world should understand, because I think it's a wonderful explanation of what a good insight could be coming from your colleagues or from your peers. So what I am hoping to do, how are we doing on time, Gladys? Sarah, are we good? Are we?
Yes, we are fine.
You're doing good on time, that's great. Then I would like to ask Gladys, first of all, to maybe unmute yourself, and I will put out this somewhat busy slide, but it's supposed to be informative rather than representative or somehow entertaining, right? And what we've done with Gladys was to ask some of the questions about your experience of KM4Dev. What is value for you personally? Please read the slide as the first try of capturing a good story of the value of this community for some of the members. And also think of it as a way to start your thinking. It doesn't have to be considered like the only case of value creation in KM4Dev, or to be the most representative case of it. You probably have your own experience, but when you go into the breakout rooms, it would be lovely that you have Gladys' very brave example of what was community of practice value for her personally. And I love this story because it starts with a lot of enabling value of what the core group is doing, of what the facilitation team is doing for KM4Dev, and that goes into your personal story, Gladys, with youth leadership and some of the knowledge cafes that we're running on that. What I would like, Gladys, to ask you to help me with is to understand if it really shows what matters for you. Because when I had the discussion with you, I tried to capture what I hear, the highlights of that discussion. And this is a kind of mirror back to what we discussed so far. So how well does it show what matters really for you and your work when you think of KM4Dev?
Thank you so much, Olga. Whenever I think of KM4Dev, I always say it's a home for me. I remember way back in 2017, when I was doing my master's in knowledge management, and it was a bit challenging getting to meet with other knowledge managers in Kenya. And I first came across KM4Dev when one of the members of the core group KM4Dev team Nita shared about that. Yeah, you know, there's a group called the KM4Dev. You people, you should be joining. And we organized a knowledge cafe so that we get to learn what is it all about KM4Dev and how can we, you know, contribute in terms of KM for sustainable development. And that was my journey into knowledge management in way back 2017 in KM4Dev. And as a result of that, you know, sharing what we are doing in KM4Dev, you know, through the KM4Dev knowledge cafes, which I am part of the team in co-facilitating, this has really resulted into higher participation of many people who are not even knowledge managers, but they see the value in contributing, and also where like everyone is being, you know, like supported whenever you have any challenge or you're still a new person in knowledge management, like the members of KM4Dev are always there for you. So, and this gave us an opportunity. Like we are learning from what the KM4Dev leadership has, and that was an incredible experience for me. Like first time you are in a community whereby you're being funded not based on the like the titles that you have or the age, but the community is so welcoming. So learning from the KM4Dev leadership, it gave us an opportunity to create more communities of practice in Kenya. We have the first one, Information Society of Kenya, which for the first time we have put together knowledge managers and other information scientists. And for the first time, it is one of the first communities of practice to be registered by the government of Kenya. Soon we'll be launching it. So this is through the funding of KM4Dev. In addition to that, also in my previous work, through what I'm learning from KM4Dev communities of practice, how to engage the members, how to build the leadership team among within the organization, and designing communities of practice guidelines to support others. It is through the KM4Dev that I was able to get an opportunity to do the World Bank Communities of Practice certification program, which was really a high opener for me. If it was not for KM4Dev, definitely I would not have gotten that opportunity. And as a result, I'm seeing more impact and more creation of COPs in Kenya. Currently also, we are also now coming up with creating COP in our communities to address various specific SDGs, especially on climate change in our villages, which is so exciting, like the lessons that we are learning from KM4Dev. And I love this from the action plan in terms of decolonization of knowledge, where like the framework was focusing on what can you do as an individual when we talk about decolonizing knowledge. And this gave me an overview, like, how am I going to give back to my community and how are we creating value to that? Other things that I'm currently doing is also mentoring other students who are pursuing knowledge management. And we've seen, like in Kenya, there's more students now pursuing knowledge management, and KM4Dev has become like a practical lab where they can learn more about KM and get access to more mentors to be supported. Finally, also to share what KM4Dev has created, finally, also creating more room for young people and also young professionals who are new to knowledge management. And recently we launched, in 2021, we launched the first Young Leaders Forum. And we also have now another sign up. We already have 64 people who have already signed up for the upcoming mentorship program starting from June. So we appreciate the work of the KM4Dev and also the support of the leadership.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And the story is also about the mentorship programs that you have on the screen, right? About the way that this community contributed to the way you engage with the young people and the way you mentor them. In the end of the day, seeing a lot of students join in the master programs, right, in knowledge management, which is seems like a story of the value that's in your context, something that matters, something that's important. And there are probably a lot of people thinking, and how about this as well? How about the value for, I don't know, the organization where I work? How about the value for me personally? How about the value for my stakeholders somewhere? And these are the kind of questions that quite often one story wouldn't answer, but quite often if you collect a number of different stories, then they represent a lot of the value that's been created or what people recognize as being value as an outcome of some community activities, of the way you create it, the way you plan them, the way you facilitate them. I will just say thank you, Gladys. It sounded to me as if there were a lot of other stories that could be also written on your behalf, I think, and shared so other people can learn from them. I would also like, just considering the time, to ask Maureen to join us here, because Maureen has another story where I would also like to share her experience with it, with KM4Dev. Just remember, as mentioned before, the stories don't have to be representative for your context. They are something that has been experienced by other people, right? On the other hand, if you think of what is of value for your experience, for your way of being in KM4Dev, Then all of these questions and ideas would be lovely to be discussed in the breakout rooms when we move there. So Maureen, could I ask you to unmute and join me here? Because I thought your story was also very interesting, different from Gladys, but you are very connected with each other because you're also working closely together. But I thought the idea of facilitating communities of practice was great. So how well does it represent what matters for your work? It's a snapshot, right? It's a short, very kind of condensed, short description of everything you shared with me in half an hour of our conversation. But
Okay, thank you, Olga. And today, let me just share briefly, just as glad this is done. We were both in Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology doing masters in information and knowledge management. But just within duration of the course, COVID came. And we all know everything happened so fast. You couldn't continue with the studies, and we were working also from home. And in brief, we had a lot of free time. And we also have a COP for the students doing a master's in JQuat. So once Gladys joined KM4Dev, she also shared with us in our COP, it's through our WhatsApp group, that, hey, there's a ABC, I found it interesting, those who wish can join. And truly during that time, you know, when you're a student, this is something that you really love to do. And here you have experienced people in the same field that you're aspiring to learn more, and you have a lot of free time to learn that. It was really inspiring because I remember we used to have sessions, like almost daily. And it really encouraged us. And personally, I really learned a lot, especially in my academic journey, up to when I was doing my project that led to my graduation in 2022 in knowledge management. Beside that, ever since, I've been a member of KM4Dev, and we know there are stories that go on about the global north and the global south. And for quite a long time, we've seen that Africans usually feels like, hey, the whites are a superpower or something. And there has been that kind of racial segregation in everything that, or communities or organizations where we have people from across the races. But in KM4Dev, I found out that through the leadership, it had the leadership is an open opportunity. You can volunteer to work there. Your ideas are listened to. You can ask questions. Nobody's segregating you, and you learn throughout the process. This is one aspect that really gave me the morale to get that morale to engage more in KM4Dev. Through KM4Dev also, as I work with the State Department for Economic Planning in Kenya, I was able to get much insights that we incorporated in our national knowledge management policy. And I believe we are among the first countries in the world to have a national KM policy. So the knowledge I gained from KM4Dev really played a major role in that, performing that activity. Aside that, I'm a fan of agriculture and food security. And for quite a long time, from where I come from, my home, Kenyan coastal region, we've had a lot of myth whereby we never used to grow our own food. We never used to make an extra coin from farming. But through KM4Dev and us professionals from the coastal region, we had formed a COP whereby we registered and opened a farmers cooperative. And currently our membership is standing to close to 650 registered members, out of which around 300 are very active members. And I am the Secretary General there. Leading a group, leading a community needs a lot of experience, a lot of skills, and KM4Dev has really played a great role in that. For having a WhatsApp group from 2018, we are now in 2023, and the community is working, and we can hear stories. Our farmers are now doing value addition. Our farmers, a good number has moved from subsistence farming to farming, even in a small land for commercial farming, and we are changing lives there. So through that also, through KM4Dev, I've had a very great impact in that community of practice. Lastly, but not the least, because we have very many testimonies on the same, together with Gladys, we are also managing a COP for Africa Knowledge Managers. And currently we are having members close to more than 10 countries, and we are really growing, even if we can't say we are where we were last year. And last year, but one when we were starting the COP. So truly, there's that great impact when we talk of what we've learned on matters COPs from KM4Dev. Let me just stop there. There's a lot that we can share, and I believe maybe sometime we'll create to the full days cafes that we used to have during COVID time. Thank you.
No, thank you for sharing, and thank you for stepping up and showing some of your experience with KM4Dev. The conversation on value creation quite often, I think, starts with people recognizing in their own experience what's the value. For me, I heard some people even telling me that there's something psychological in it, in writing down the kind of value that you are gaining and the value that you are creating with the other people that you are talking to, working together, passionately engaging in different topics that are close to your heart and close to the challenges that you experience. And so I wanted not just to speak on my behalf, but to give both Gladys and Maureen and some others as well a chance to share the experience and what they believe is being created as value for your context, for the countries where you are. It's such an international community this is, that I can't stop being amazed as how many countries are there in this chat note, in the chats where we are rating the countries that we represent. What I will do for now is I will give a chance to those of you who have some questions. I would like to ask me some questions. I'll do my best to answer. You might know or have better answers than I do, but let's have a conversation about it and speak. I will only say one last thing here before. If you ever come to Denmark, this is a beautiful building called Blocks Hub, and I'm working here sometimes. You're very welcome to come and have a chat, have a coffee. If you ever come over, if you are here for a conference, if you work in Copenhagen, you can also contact me on LinkedIn or through my email. I find this work quite exciting. I think I was more or less in love with the idea of community of practice to begin with, but somehow I grew a more critical understanding of it, and I'm still trying. So please ask the questions if you have any. Just unmute. Or Rocio and Gladys, Maureen, if there are any questions in the chat, I would also like to ask you to help me find them.
More than questions, I think there are some interesting comments, and I
Sure.
was wondering, maybe Nancy, Sarah, and Jacob, you can share. Starting by Nancy.
You're tagging me, huh?
Yes.
Well, first of all, Olga, thank you so much, and I love that you brought the two stories in. And I think one of the kind of meta points that I experience from you is that stories are a valuable and accepted, legitimate way to show value creation, because I think there's so many metrics that reduce things down to these sort of atomized parts that don't really contribute to our understanding of things. And yet we say, oh, well, I want some quantitative data about the success of the community of practice. It reduced the number of call to the service center by X%. That underestimates the value. So I appreciate the story approach that Bev and Etienne developed with us here, and the examples that you gave here. I'm curious about how these stories are received in your organizations. How do they put them to use? Any examples there would be lovely.
How the stories are received? That's a very good question, and thank you for pointing out the idea that stories are accepted. And with some of the groups, or the groups that I worked with so far, stories is a way to make it somehow tangible and sensible as to what is it this whole community thing about? And quite often people like to see the story on somebody's behalf, saying, oh, those people worked together on something and they figured out a way to solve this issue. But the idea came from the community because they were sitting and discussing what's that thing, right? If you are in a hospital system in Denmark, then maybe, the way you send letters to patients is such a trouble because, you send some standard letters and the letters end up, coming into the patient's inbox and they don't understand what they're supposed to do. So they show up being maybe not prepared or being less prepared than they should be or showing up somewhere else where they shouldn't show up. And you sit and discuss that in your community thinking, what could we do? And then you see a story coming out of it of some 3 people sitting together, putting their heads together and trying to figure out a solution about it that grows from even maybe one region to other regions in Denmark. And for me, what I wanted to do all my life about, all my community of practice life, which is like 8 years now, was to give the connection between those who sponsor and can support communities and the understanding of the value of communities in people's eyes and people's language. And that's what the stories are doing. I do collect sometimes up to like 30 stories in one go, and they don't have to be perfect as such to be to give some sort of understanding for the managers and the organization as to what people are really trying to do. So some of this was used for like decision making. How should we support learning going forward? If our people are saying they're learning from the community, from being with each other, getting some ideas from each other, then how can we support it even more going forward? Can we give them more chances of engaging where it's relevant? Should we try not to stop them? If we put them in projects together, who should be working together on projects? Where would it make most sense for their learning aspirations, for what they are trying and what they are finding difficult? One of my projects was like the feedback from participants was, we would really like to see other people's stories. Are you going to share all of them? Yes, we shared all of the stories. And at the end of the day, no matter what kind of report I write, I think people go directly to the story part and see, what do those other people in my community, what are they saying, what they're gaining, what they're using, what they are the effects of it. So I've seen both giving management the understanding of how it is for people and what works best for their learning as a group. Still, I speak quite a lot about internal communities in organizations where managers are both sponsors of communities and direct managers at the same time for the people that are there. Some of my thoughts, I hope it makes sense, Nancy. Thank you.
We have a specific question from Judah, who is saying, what does the role of culture play in strengthening the COP from the Danish perspective? And there was also some comments from Aldo on towards creating trust and gaining confidence to strengthen the community. I don't know, Aldo or Judah, if you want to jump in, or just I leave it to you all.
Please do jump in, put a few words on it, yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
should I say something? Or
yes, please.
Yes,
please.
yes.
Okay, and 1 second. Okay. Yeah, one thing, I just put something in the chat, which kind of intrigued me. I'm getting ever more convinced about the enormous power and empowerment of stories. And yeah, as you said, Nancy, I think when I first saw their framework, the value creation framework, it kind of hit me like a brick, in a positive sense, if that's possible. Just that you kind of create the acceptance by the bureaucracies and the kind of the power layers that it is a valid methodology, but it's so much more than just another metric. It's really about, as I just say, what did I actually say? Something about, yeah, stories really help to generate trust, openness, to create possibilities, to create that confidence. Maureen, what you said, I really like that, gaining confidence. As so often we all pretend because everybody's afraid of everybody else, and we're all professionals, and you don't want to admit that actually you don't know all the answers. Just like you said, Olga, just admitting I also just know so little. That's what I like about KM4Dev in general. I think that's also the kind of professional values that we can teach and share with others, that nobody knows basically much more than just a very little bit about all these incredibly wicked problems, and we're all in this together. And that's why I think stories as a methodology, I always see them, I'm seeing them ever more as key, a starting point rather than an add-on, as so often see, oh yeah, we also need to do some storytelling. So you really use the story networks as a starting point to move in a different direction, in the direction of impact, collective impact. And then of course the indicators are necessary to further create evidence, or at least indicators of weight, etc. But stories are key. So in my own work, I'm also trying ever more to make stories the starting point rather than the final kind of, oh yeah, also something to add on to the methodologies, if that makes sense. I'm just trying to ramble a bit now.
Oh, no, thank you very much for saying that as well. Quite often, sometimes people think that the whole approach is going to be about collecting, like doing the matrix and everything. And I had some organizations who just resisted having any matrix connected to the stories that we are collecting. It's like, whoa, that's interesting as a situation to be in somehow. For them, it was very important that the stories come out first as a way people see them, and then from there you could start thinking about what does it mean, right? And where do we need to collect some statistics or some other kind of data that would even validate the stories that we have, or strengthen them as a way to do it. Thank you very much for your comments. It's amazing to be understood, if I may say so.
Yeah.
You have a question from Jacqueline Nam that says, I don't quite get how CoPs are used to make jobs attractive in Denmark. I don't know, Jacqueline, if you want to jump in and elaborate your comment.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Just responding to something I thought I had Olga talk about. By the way, thank you, Olga, for that brilliant presentation. But I thought I heard you say that CoPs are used as a way of making jobs attractive in Denmark. I mean, during the recruitment process. And I just wanted to hear more about that, because I think I went off and missed some of what you said.
What I mentioned at that point was that if you just go to the main job portal in Denmark, the job engine where people normally look for jobs, you will see that communities of practice are used quite often in Denmark to say that when you get this job, you're also going to be a part of a community of practice. And that way, marketing almost organizations as good places to be. In IT especially, where the competition is really tough these days in Denmark, and IT digital world is very developed in many respects here. Almost any organization I know would be promoting their communities of practice and the kind of communities of practice they have in the job descriptions. I don't know how it is in other countries, so please help me understand that. But you will see quite a lot of jobs in Denmark where community of practice is a part of attracting people, as a part of describing the way your work is going to be when you get hired in this. And it goes all the way from teachers at schools to IT, to engineering, to management. Sometimes, of course, you're also the one running this community, so you're hired in a job to run the community of practice. But I've seen it used quite consistently across all sectors. Not all organizations in Denmark would have communities of practice internally. Maybe they would call it something else sometimes as well. And some organizations wouldn't even call it community of practice. I had one project where I started working on it. I was like, well, I've never seen a community of practice as strong as this. And they never called it a community of practice in the first place. But back to your comment, Jacqueline, thank you for that. I was also quite surprised when I started researching what is going on in Denmark in terms of communities of practice, that a lot of organizations are seeing the value of communities and seeing the value in attracting people to be a part of that culture where you're sharing with each other. I hope I somewhat answered your question.
Yes, you did excellently. And I think it shows a high level of awareness of the value of communities of practice among people in Denmark. So it's something now that you can use to attract good candidates for a job. I think in my situation in Uganda and where I've worked elsewhere, perhaps people have not yet been made aware of this consciously. So maybe we have one or two things to learn from the lessons in Denmark.
Yeah. The way I see it is that I quite often, when you open a job description, I kind of sit and monitor what kind of organizations, what good communities of practice, what interesting cases are there. Is there any good case where an evaluation could be used to make people or help people recognize the value of communities? And you would see like a specific description of what community you are joining when you are getting that job or when you are applying for this job, saying you are going to be a member of enterprise architecture community of practice, and in this community of practice even can be a description of what you do in this community with each other, what kind of ideas or discussions people are having. So not just one word mentioned, community of practice, but even an elaboration of that, a description of what that community is doing. So you can be happy or excited to join the group.
There is Nancy's asking if you can share a little bit more about the matrix.
Yeah, which matrix, Nancy? Help me understand a little bit.
You mentioned about putting the stories into the matrix, and I'm not sure that
adding some kind of matrix or statistics to the stories and the data that could be collected on different cycles of the value creation. What I mentioned there was that I had an experience with an organization. They kind of sort of almost resisted having any other data than the stories collected on what they do, which I found quite interesting actually as a way to highlight the importance of stories and the experience that people have before the normal way of doing management and business, before we start looking at the numbers and then going into people's experience about it somehow. But if I have to think of a particular organization, I actually had one request where I was asked to start with numbers, with qualitative data, and we ended up collecting very few stories in that organization. This challenging case was that they wanted to bring testers and developers together in one community. And in IT, if you are doing testing, you probably have some kind of, if it's finance, then you have financial background. And if you are in IT, you have development IT background. So the two groups are quite difficult to put together, even if they are working together on a daily basis, but making a transformation in that group towards everybody being able to do both testing and development and what kind of innovations come out of that. That was a difficult case where we started with statistics, with the data, but ended up collecting only 2 stories, which I found quite interesting. So which approach is best? I'm not sure if you start with stories or you start with other ways, but somehow experience that I had was stories come first as a way to collect further data going forward. Because starting with an idea that we would like all people to, I don't know, reduce the development time and then squeezing some stories out of people to show the case didn't somehow work in that case. But Nancy, maybe you have some other experience, please share, because I wouldn't say that I have the most representative experience in this group of people working with the value creation framework.
No, and I thank you for clarifying metrics versus matrix, because I'm kind of like, I never heard about the matrix.
Oh, sorry for that. That's
Aldo figured that out. No, I haven't done it. So, I'm really curious because I use the value creation in a very light way, but more often I refer people to practitioners who can help them with it. So I'm more like an intermediary versus a practitioner. But I'm constantly bringing it up because I feel there is this invisible value that's really important. I think the thing that most caught my eye in this whole thing was, in order to get to our large aspirations, right? The really important big things, we tend to want to measure those. But the path to get to those big things is how we get to the big things, but we don't tend to want to pay attention to the little things. So in the value creation framework, and I'm going to probably use the language wrong, is noticing the immediate value, and that next level of value is so important. Like what happened in the meeting today that changed our understanding of communities of practice? Who did we meet today that we can have a further conversation about this? If we don't notice those small practices, how the heck can we get to the big practices? And when we get to them or don't get to them, how do we understand how we did or didn't get there so we could do something different the next time? So for me, the power of this is that little things matter to get to big things. And for me, KM4Dev has always nurtured things that the big brass or the management might not think as important things, like getting to know each other or getting to understand our different perspectives without that damaging judgment of saying, oh, well, that won't work here. We've done that and it doesn't work. That kind of stuff. The little stuff that eventually unlocks power that we couldn't see before. And to me, again, to go back to the question, I think stories are the one way that we've been able to see that. And I love the prompts that you did with Gladys and Maureen to get those stories. So for me, I'd want us all to pay attention to the very practical nature of those prompts. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Olga, for this, and also Gladys and Maureen for your stories. It's been really great listening. Now, I'm in Wageningen in the Netherlands, and Charles Dewa, who's many of you know, he's visiting at the moment. He's working away hard on his PhD thesis, so he's not joining us today. But one of the things we discussed when we were just driving along in the car was actually what makes KM4Dev different. And what we thought really was something also that both Gladys and Maureen have mentioned, this fact that you know, we all try to support each other and accept each other, and that, you know, we try and be like a safe pair of hands for each other because we're all very busy, but we try and do our best and supporting each other, but also being very accepting that everybody's at different sort of, different perspectives and things like that. And one of the strengths, I think, really is, I think these stories are absolutely amazing and I hear something new every time. But one of the things I really think is that KM4Dev is really having a long-term impact. So although the stories are really important individual changes, and that actually like what we've done really at a systems level, and we're only really, like we only get little snippets of this because we're not looking at it at all. But like, for example, on the testimonies on the website, Axel Mead was talking about, how KM4Dev working with other organizations has really had a systemic impact in the Caribbean region. So, but I think there are lots of examples like this. And also, for example, I think some of Rocio's work on knowledge retention also shows that how people are moving in and out of organizations, but they're always here. And so I'm wondering really, how is the framework, how can the sort of value creation framework try and capture these bigger issues as well? Because, we really have not been good at trying to map them because we're all too, we're all concerned with, the community, keeping the community going and our own work. And actually it'll be really great to have ideas for how we could try and capture that as well a little bit.
Okay, I just wanted to add a comment on what Nancy commented on regarding the matrix, stories, and indicators. Currently, we are having a challenge, let me not measure it big or small, in institutionalizing the knowledge management policy that we have for Kenya with regards to how the KM indicators. And having been in economic development department where policies, the plans for the country are made, they are used to those big indicators for the various outputs and outcomes. And for knowledge management, as we see the small ideas that we are talking of, once you tell them that truly these are some of the small indicators that we really need to use in measuring knowledge management, they tend to feel like, no, that's something that really doesn't sit well with them. So that's one of the challenges that we are encountering now in the implementation of the knowledge management policy for Kenya. And due to the issue of indicators, for this financial year, we were not able to include knowledge management in the performance contract guidelines that were signed the other day. You saw our leadership signing in the president and the ministers and the PSs. But the good news is next week, we are having a retreat with the principal secretaries, and we're just going to talk about knowledge management. And so far we have 26 of them who have accepted the invites. And I'm happy because this is an opportunity for them to ask the questions about KM so that they'll understand. And come next financial year, we'll be able to progress well when it comes to the indicators for knowledge management. Thank you.
Great. Jacob, you had before made some comments. I wonder if you want to share your experience as well.
Yeah. So from my side here, the experience I've had with communities of practice, in particular with KM4Dev, is the sense of trust and psychological safety that gets developed once you feel that you can trust the people you're in a community with. You don't feel at risk sharing the stories of failure or negative outcomes, because they're just a learning experience that you as the storyteller can get some really good feedback out of, but also you as the listener to that story know what pitfalls or mistakes to try and avoid. And I've just found that super good, super refreshing, also in my professional work life as well, and especially also on the note of gaining confidence, that I think was either you, Gladys, or Maureen who mentioned that doing these or taking part in these sessions and leading them or presenting is something that I've found really valuable in terms of growing my own confidence as a KM professional, but also as a person presenting to a general audience. There's a more sense of resting within oneself when doing this, after having done it for a few times, also knowing that the community or the group of people that you're engaging with accept the small mistakes or whatever you want to call it that you do as a person not necessarily completely confident with talking in a public room. And also on another point that you mentioned, Olga, and that I think you asked about, Jacqueline, in terms of how communities of practice also can help make jobs in Denmark, for example, more attractive or a better fit. And that's, for example, in my case, having been a project knowledge manager with one of the larger wind power organizations. What I experienced was that we were able to set up a lot of different communities involving a lot of different people from a wide variety of engineering disciplines, and then connecting them. So in that sense, you would know who are the different, for example, more senior level people that you could reach out to in terms of growing your own knowledge, but also in terms of figuring out whether there might be a future position in engineering department XYZ for you, based off of the interactions you could have with that individual in the different knowledge sharing sessions. And also with those sessions being, in this case, something that was organized on regular basis, would also give you a really good access point to continuously interact with those different people, with their senior or general peers in those different engineering groups, to get you to know them on a more personal basis, rather than just going into the organization job portal and then apply for the position. So in a certain sense, circumventing the system and then selling yourself as the better candidate because of that personal connection to the individuals.
And it's very important in Denmark. I have to say, as an international in Denmark, you really have to know the people. So your communities mean a lot for you. But that's a side note, I guess. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There is a question from John Induri. I wonder, John, if you want to jump in and made it out loud.
Yes, I can make my question. I got curious when Maureen mentioned that when the ministries and the agencies that fall under them signed the performance contracts recently, that we missed indicators on knowledge management, yet I know and guess that most agencies that fall in ministries are ISO compliant, and with ISO, there is the ISO on KM. So I'm just curious how that happened.
Okay,
and how
maybe
it's gonna be rectified or remedied. Thanks.
Okay, let me make it clear, John. We had set the indicators for knowledge management, but the top management, the top leadership, that is the cabinet secretaries, we also have the principal secretaries, and also majority of the technical officers in the various ministries could not really understand. As we all know, we've been struggling with the issue of knowledge management in Kenya since the year 2008, up until last year when we were able to draft and have the policy in place. So since that, they were not really understanding, and we have a policy in place, we decided to shelve it from the PS's a performance contract for this financial year, so that the first remedy is the top management should really understand what KM is. And that's what we are doing. And as I have mentioned, next week we are having a meeting with our principal officers in the country. And these are they are the authority in the various state departments. So that's a measure that we've taken, a lot of sensitization that we are going to do this financial year. And we are also going to practically, we've started practically helping the various ministries, departments, agencies in understanding what really knowledge management is. I believe if in case you have more questions, we can get in contact aside because of time, but generally, those are the measures that we've put in place.
Gladys, you had your hand raised before. You want to make a comment?
I think John has already responded, and maybe to share in terms of metrics from Kenyan perspective, the entire context. I think in terms of knowledge management, we've seen this growth from the development sector and also in academia, and even in various ministries here in Kenya. There is more of KM. Allow me also to use another example from my county government. I used to share quite a lot about knowledge management, and our governor from Elgeyo Marakwet County took up the challenge. I remember saying, you know, when he was being appointed as the chair for the Council of Governors, he didn't understand what this is all about KM, but he really appreciated what we keep on sharing and also what we share from the KM4Dev. So there's much recognition from the leadership, including Governor Sakaja of Nairobi County, who is also taking the lead in terms of knowledge management. From my previous organization, which I was working on, we supported a lot of over 47 counties here in Kenya in supporting in terms of the communities of practice, working together with the healthy organizations and also various county governments. So there's quite a lot of growth in terms of care. It's only that we need to see on how we can gauge the success. Over to you, Rocio.
Thank you. When we were thinking to do the breakout room, we were going to pose a question to everyone. And I think there is already experience in the room with communities. So I was wondering if anyone wants to talk about how do you create value in your communities? How do you do it to ensure that you create value? Is there anyone who wants to share?
It's a wonderful question, and maybe I should open it a bit up because with the way we're thinking about going from KM4Dev, which is your immediate experience here now, is to go into your other communities, if you facilitate communities, if you participate in other communities, how do you create something of value in the communities where you are? And sometimes for me personally, it can be tricky thing, because on the one hand, you work with communities of practice and with value creation, but when it comes to your personal experience of doing this for other people, I think KM4Dev has such an experience of facilitating communities and making sure there is space for value creation that people can take and go with. I often think that for my work, we are really trying to shift from being only English speaking in the environment where we are to being also like Danish speaking, which opens up for a lot of opportunities for people to contribute, where maybe English as the language cannot express it. So I really love collecting stories in Danish, for example, which shows a different way of seeing the world in the language as the way it's experienced. And I worked with other languages as well. The latest thing that I'm trying to do is to start speaking a bit of Ukrainian. My husband is from Ukraine, but I don't speak the language. I understand it. But for me to speak the language and understand and collect stories from other people, I should really ask the questions in their language. Otherwise, the translation is difficult and things get lost in the translation. So that's when I think of creating value, and that's one of the small things that I'm trying to do, is to speak the language that people speak in a way. But I'm looking from my perspective as somebody who would come and evaluate the community. And I also speak Russian to begin with, so I have a lot of power not to have to speak Ukrainian altogether. So I really have to bother, and I really have to make the effort, because majority would just switch into Ukrainian, into Russian to me if they understand. So having power is a tricky thing, and having power that you just let go and try to be with people on their terms is something that I find is very useful. So what about others? They were really curious of how you think of value creation in communities. And from my perspective, I would love to hear from others, because now that I have you in this room, I would really love to hear from your experience.
Hello. Olga, actually you've answered my question. I'd asked how does the culture actually help in reinforcing community of practice? And one thing that was coming in my mind was now that you've been working across different countries, and languages, maybe I thought culture will play a very important role in reinforcing or impeding community of practice. But from your presentation, it's now clear that culture is a really very strong point to reinforce. For example, the languages in different places, how people do things in their respective countries or regions. And it is coming very clear that when the culture is embraced in different respective regions, then the community of practices can become stronger. That is my view, general view of the thing. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that comment as well on the cultural side. Yeah. Because in Denmark, I don't know if Jakob, you're going to agree with me. I think the culture is very consensus seeking, where we can talk things to death in many ways, but we need to reach a consensus with each other in terms of how to proceed and what to do. And in that respect, I can see that communities of practice in Denmark can be also different than in other countries as to how much time is invested in building trust among each other and understanding each other's perspectives. So I think I'm probably a bit privileged as well as I live in Denmark to be doing this work, because quite often seeing how value manifests itself in different contexts, if you are working in 3 different departments internationally in different countries, managers in Denmark would really love to understand what it means for you in your country, instead of typically in many organizations where I come from, Eastern Siberia in Russia, you would be imposed a lot of decisions. So I think Denmark does it quite well. Not to make it very pinky and beautiful that everything just works here. We also have questions and challenges, but I think it does mean a lot in terms of how communities are able to prosper and continue. and how much space sponsors give to communities. And I think Jakob has a comment back to what I'm saying, so go ahead.
No, well, not as much a comment, but an addition. But I think Jacqueline had the hand raised.
Oh, first. Good.
So I'll let her.
Thank you, Jacob, for giving me a turn before you. I think when it comes to creating value in communities of practice, it's not always apparent what value we are creating or that we are creating value. Myself, I've been largely engaged, from the facilitator side of things. And sometimes we do things, but we are not sure whether it's creating value for members of the community of practice until we have opportunities to engage one-on-one with them. And then they say, oh, I love this, I love that, and the other. But maybe if I may share some few things that people have appreciated, which we could take as creating value. One is as facilitators of communities of practice, it's important to create a safe environment for people to share, because a facilitator cannot know everybody's capabilities or be in touch with what's happening in the world. But once the environment is conducive, then the members of the community of practice participate more, and there's a diversity of resources that are shared, opportunities, and things like that. Then from my side as a facilitator, I think things which people have valued, sharing resources on opportunities. This can be jobs, consultancies, and things like that. Sharing links to resources. For example, if there's a subject being discussed and you know of maybe a publication that has been released on that, then you share it. I see Sarah does this a lot on the KM4Dev group. Sometimes when there's a discussion and then she can relate it to a submission to the KM4Dev channel, then she makes that link, and I think that really adds a lot of value to discussions. I think it's also good to make connections between people. Sometimes somebody may pose a question or have an issue, but in the background, somebody who is perhaps quiet or a bit of a lurker on the community of practice, but they can help the person who has posed the question. So you can make that connection either on the main group discussion or in the background. You just tell the person, oh, I know so-and-so has dealt with this issue or is an expert on that. Kindly send them an email. So those are just examples that quickly come to mind. I don't know if you've heard my submission, but yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful ideas. I'm really happy that the recording is going to be there, because now that I'm not taking notes, I wish I have taken them. Yes, Sarah, you have something?
First, Jackie, thank you so much for those kind words. And I'm just going to, really nice of you. And I'm also just going to show a slide, which is looking at the value of communities of practice, which is some work that Lucy Lamoureux and Ivan Kulis did. And I really like it as a slide. I've taken it from a PowerPoint and I hope it's going to come off right, but there's no way of knowing till I press the send button, which is going to be now. Oh yeah, it's come off all right. I don't know if you can see it okay, but it looks at like the development of a community of practice and about the different phases. So like you get into a phase which is really first you have sort of like a control phase, and then it becomes more and more relaxed, and members start joining and the governance really changes. But I really like this, just because it helps put a little bit of a framework on how communities develop. That was my comment. Thank you. I hope, can you see it? Yeah, I think you can.
Yes. No, thanks. I often get that question. How do you mature a community? We're here now. Where do we go? And I find it very useful. Jakob, I think I should give you the word back.
Oh, right. What was I saying? Yeah, yes. With regards to leader, now, how was it again? Well, the first part, at least in any case, of my two-parter. I seem to have lost my train of thought.
No problem. I read somewhere that if you do this in front of you, it would come back. I'm not sure if it's going to help right now.
I'll give it a few seconds and see if I can get back on track.
Yeah, I was actually talking about the culture of leadership and management in Denmark, and I thought maybe you have some comments on that.
Yes, there it was. Exactly. Yeah, that and the point of that in I think in Denmark is that we have a very flat hierarchy in the workplace in general, and that makes it in a certain sense easier to participate because you do not center the community around the most senior person in the community. Everybody is equal within there, both from a community standpoint, but also from a Danish cultural standpoint, I would say. And that's also something that makes it a lot easier to participate in it. And then the second part was that what I think is key for value creation in a community is action. So making sure that you don't just become a lurker, for example, in an online community. If it's mainly based online, you're perhaps more inclined to just sit in the group chat and wait for people to try and hone in on a question you don't want to ask from their own experiences. But by not acting, then you're not creating the value that could happen based off of your failure or finding that other people could gain value off. So it also becomes a matter of operational discipline. For example, in seeing a problem, own a problem, communicate the problem, or experience a failure, share the failure, and let others learn from it, but also in the positive sense, of course. So being an active actioneer, or whatever you want to call it, I think is a key point in creating value for a community, rather than just being of a more passive nature and then hoping that everybody else will ask the right questions and give the right answers that you are inherently looking for to help yourself. Yeah, that was my 2 cents.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
I want to highlight 2 comments that are in the chat. One from Kingo that says that communities can also quicken, this approach can also quicken the community learning. And Nancy flagged also the importance of customizing frameworks to our own communities. So we also need to think of their own needs of each community. Just for the sake of time, because we have 2 minutes before the hour, I'm gonna pass on, unless Olga, if you want to make any final comment, and we pass on to Gladys. Thank you.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you really for having the chance to be here and to meet you all. It's always great to engage with other people who somehow understand what you do, even if maybe you're doing it differently, maybe you're doing other mistakes and learning from them. It's great to be here, so thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rocio. Thank you, everyone. Maybe before we close up, I would like to pass it over to Maureen. Let us just 1 minute for the chat thing, and then we will close. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Gladys. Thank you, Olga. It was a nice interaction. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this great session. And I'm grateful that I've also taken a few points home, and it's part of what is going to build my KM knowledge and expertise. So with regards to that, as we always do it, I know most of us have learned, as I've learned also, and we would love to do this in a special way. Would request that we all go to the chat session. While at the chat session, kindly type What stood out for you in creating values in COPs? Do not send the chat, just type it. Just type it. Okay, I'll just give you a few seconds. I hope everyone is typing, but not sending, not sending, not sending. Yes, Rocio has posted the question there. So as we type what stood out in creating values for COPs, let me remind you that to learn without reflecting is like eating without digesting. That's a very interesting quote. Okay, I believe we've all typed. Gladys, are you still typing? Okay, thank you. So I believe we've all typed our lessons learned today, and can we all click send out the chats? Wow, I love that. I love that. I love that. Thank you for following the simple instructions. The feedback is great. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm seeing they're still coming in. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, seems Lebotsa. Oh, they're still coming. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for the great feedback. I don't want to lock anybody out. Do we still have any other comments? Wow. So I'll thank you very much once more. I'll hand the session back to Gladys.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and always making our Knowledge Cafe successful. We appreciate the contribution of everyone, and always remember, whatever we share in our Knowledge Cafe contributes to our KM4Dev knowledge production, which includes our KM4Dev channel. So I know we are heading up the session, but we still have more an opportunity to keep on engaging and also contributing to these communities of practice. I'm going to share with you how to join the KM4Dev D groups if you are a first-time member to the KM4Dev family. And also, we are going to share the recording through our KM4Dev YouTube channel. So let's keep in touch. And always, you're welcome to KM4Dev. It's your home. Feel free to share. You're always being supported. And in case you want to build your own communities of practice in your country, always remember that KM4Dev has your support. So check the chat. I'm sharing with you how to join KM4Dev. Did you need any support? Sarah, Rocio, Gladys, and Maureen are always there for you. And always our star, Nancy, is always welcome you whenever you're joining first time. So we can stop the recording. Feel free, if you still want to hang out for coffee. We love 10 coffee at the